She had recorded her first blues song, That Thing Called Love, on Valentine's Day 1920 with an all-white band of musicians, a compromise solution. No other African-American had ever recorded a blues song before. That Thing Called Love had done well for the company, and for the second record Smith was allowed to play with her regular band. When she had heard of the decision, she broke into a spontaneous dance of joy. Now, after a long day's recording, the second record, Crazy Blues, was ready for pressing and distribution. It would sell 75,000 copies in Harlem alone in just 1 month. Throughout the United States, sales soon topped 1 million, a historic achievement, and not just for a black artist. Only star tenor Enrico Caruso and Al Jolson's hit song Swanee sold more that year. What made Mamie Smith's recording success so phenomenal was that both white and black households were buying Crazy Blues. Something new had happened. Classical singers such as Caruso and professional crooners such as Jolson had begun to carry a more popular repertoire into people's lives, but always in a form as shiny and carefully arranged as Jolson's brilliantined hair. By contrast, Smith's singing conveyed unvarnished emotion. A whole culture found its voice in hers. She combined the bellow of a street hawker and the vocal punch of an angry washerwoman with the sorrow of centuries of humiliation and a young woman's sheer lust for life. It was not the first time popular singers had sung with such raw sassiness, of course, but it was the first time such a performance had been recorded. The voice of the down-and-dirty people came into the polite living rooms of the middle and upper classes, and young listeners in particular decided that it spoke for them too. As Mamie Smith was riding a wave of success as Queen of the Blues, other black artists broadened the appeal of jazz in the United States and beyond. Jazz was much, much more than danceable tunes. It was the child of slavery and speakeasies, the inspiration for indecency and irresponsibility, acoustic subversion, the musical infiltration of lives lived at the margins into the center of society. In America, young black musicians such as Louis Armstrong, Jelly Roll Morton, Sidney Bechet, Bessie Smith, and Duke Ellington were often restricted to segregated or illegal clubs and bars. In Europe, which was still reeling from the nightmare of the First World War, they toured the great cities and were welcomed as heralds of a new age. Jazz somehow embodied everything that had changed, and more. It embodied the fact that nothing was the same now as it had been in 1914. Jazz became the soundtrack of an age, the incendiary charge flung into society, igniting tensions, stoking sensuality, and sapping the old order. Even the Nazis would pay tribute to the power of its message by fighting a culture war against degenerate nigger jazz, wary of its immense pull and eloquence, yet unable to replace it with anything but cheerily sterilized swing music, military marches, and Viennese waltzes corrupted into vehicles of National Socialist feeling. But they never felt safe. Syncopation, it seemed, was lurking in every corner. A paradox lies at the heart of this image of an all-new world suddenly risen from the war. As I have argued in the Vertigo years, Change and Culture in the West, 1900 to 1914, the great shift into the modern age did not spring full-blown out of the trenches of the Western Front. Rather, many of its elements were already in place well before 1914. Mass societies, consumerism, mass media, urbanization, big industry and big finance, feminism, psychoanalysis, the theory of relativity, abstract art, and atonal music all predate the beginning of the war. So why did the world suddenly seem so much more modern? Why is it that far more than a single decade seems to separate the fashions, social mores, and moral outlook of, say, 1913 and 1923? Perhaps this apparent paradox can be resolved by another one. The First World War is generally accepted to represent a radical break for the societies concerned, followed by a new beginning. This assumption of a sudden rupture may appear to explain why the world looked different after 1918. But when studying the period, one is struck time and again by the great forces of continuity originating around 1900, traversing the war years and reaching far into the future. In the epigraph at the beginning of this book, the German poet Hugo Ball